Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. It is 10 a.m. Central and 8 a.m. Pacific, just like we had planned for. So we really want to thank everyone for joining us on today's call. Welcome to our webinar with Onspring and the Unified Compliance Framework. We're going to be talking about how to survive and thrive in evolving regulatory waters with a joint partnership between our Onspring platform and the Unified Compliance Framework's regulatory content. My name is Jason Rolfe. I'm the Vice President of Solutions here with Onspring Technologies. Very happy to be here with you guys today. I'm also going to be joined today by Matt Pugh, who is our Vice President of Product, as well as Craig Isaacs, who is the CEO of Unified Compliance. Before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Number one, in your WebEx, you should see a Q&A panel. If you have questions as we go through, if you have curiosities or want to learn more, feel free to submit a question through that Q&A panel, and we'll have someone monitoring that, and certainly we'll work to leave time at the end to address some of these questions. Also, this session will be recorded, so once the session is complete, we'll be sure to send you guys a link so that you can access that or share that with others in your organization. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. So before we dive into the nature of this partnership between Onspring and the Unified Compliance Program, we just want to give a little bit of background on Onspring itself. What is Onspring? Well, Onspring is a cloud-based business process automation platform that allows you to configure a wide variety of business processes and solve a wide variety of business problems using the same standard core set of functionality. We built Onspring because we really wanted to seek to create a better platform, to create something that organizations and individuals could use that could make their lives easier, make them more efficient at what they did. We sought to take advantage of new technologies in the marketplace to understand that there were a lot of technologies out there that maybe were mired in old technology or hadn't really innovated in quite some time. So our primary aim was to focus on the two beacons that really drive everything that we do, which would be the performance of the system and the overall end-user experience. The performance of the system from the standpoint of Onspring should be very responsive. We feel that a solution that's going to help you implement, for example, a regulatory compliance program should be very intuitive, should be very responsive, should perform at a level that you would expect to allow you to keep up with the fast pace of your job and the regulatory challenges that you're facing. From an end-user experience, we want to make the end-user experience much cleaner, much more intuitive, regardless of whether you're an administrative user, a very heavy user of the system, or simply a light user of the system, someone who just has to come in on a periodic basis. We feel that the user interface should really help you remove the guesswork, take away the questions about where do I go to see what I'm responsible for, what do I do in this situation, where are the records that I care about. Everything that we do from an end user perspective is designed to make that experience seamless, to make that experience very pleasant and very easy to deal with. Ultimately, our goal is to help our customers do their best work and do it in a way that makes sense, given their variety of different processes, the variety in the way that they choose to address these different business problems. So Onspring is a very flexible platform. Everything we're going to show you today is going to be highly configurable and very easy to transform and to configure to meet your specific needs, your specific calculation logic, your specific reporting requirements, and we'll certainly talk about that as we get into the demonstration. But as a software company, we want our primary focus to be our product. We understand that we are experts in this particular product. We are experts in delivering this performance and usability in a system that allows you to do your best work. With that in mind, though, given that our primary focus is in the governance, risk, and compliance space, we also understand that the regulatory compliance landscape is vast, It's very complex. There's a lot of information to be dealt with. So our approach has been to partner with the experts, partner with the organizations that really focus on developing, maintaining, analyzing, breaking down this content, staying on top of it. And that's why we're really excited to partner with Unified Compliance. And with that, I'd like to introduce Craig Isaacs, who, again, is the CEO of Unified Compliance. And Craig's going to take us through some of the tools, some of the mindset of the Unified Compliance organization, of their framework, and I'm really excited to have Craig share with you his perspective, and then we'll get back into the Onspring side and show you how you can make this information that these guys provide very actionable and very relatable. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball over to Craig. And Craig, you should have the ball, and you should be ready to go.
Excellent. Let me see if I can get this to let me share my screen. There we go. All right, hopefully you're seeing my screen. Thank you very much, I appreciate it. We love working with Onspring. We appreciate being partners with you. And as you mentioned, one of the things that we're trying to help you do is figure out what to do with all the regulatory requirements, all the different issues that relate to content. There are so many complex requirements, multiple standards, lots of spreadsheets everywhere, and we're really solving these problems with the Unified Compliance Framework. And one of the ways that folks try to do it without the Unified Compliance Framework is to leverage a standard. And if we look at something like ISO 27001 to see how it actually compares to the legal requirements, we can see that, well, actually, it's not designed to meet legal requirements. It's designed to be a compliance framework that lets you have a general sense of compliance for your organization. But it doesn't cover banking, it doesn't cover healthcare, it doesn't cover PCI, it doesn't cover North American privacy, it doesn't cover Sarbanes-Oxley. So the real solution isn't to look at a standard and then follow that and ignoring the laws. It's really to look to a common control framework. So what's a common control framework? A common control is a shared compliance requirement in plain language connected to the original mandates an organization must follow. Okay, but the way folks do it when they're following a specific standard is they say, well, we're just going to crosswalk stuff, and billions of dollars are spent on crosswalking citations. And you've seen it before, where they'll try to shove everything into an ISO 27001 framework or perhaps a cybersecurity framework. And so this is actually taken from the Department of Homeland Security in the United States, and what they tried to do was crosswalk between NIST 853, 27001, the cybersecurity framework, and other things. And you'll notice when they crosswalk, they would create these huge buckets, like physical access to assets is managed and protected, and then they'll put in some very specific requirements under that. And it's really difficult to do audits when you have multiple different levels of requirements that really aren't connected together, like access points and delivery and unloading areas and using credential for facility access, because they're not the same thing. So the way something like a Unified Compliance Framework would handle it in a common control framework is we would look at these and say which ones are the same and which ones are different. And if it's the same, we'll have a common control that we create pointing to the ones that are the same, and then we create a new common control pointing to the ones that are different. So that way, each common control is actionable in its own right and auditable. And further, because we have this common control framework, when there are other requirements, we can easily point a common control to whatever other requirements may come up. For example, in this case, maintain identification issuance procedures is part of PCI, it's part of CBIS, it's part of NIST 853, and FIPS. So having that common control lets you actually connect at the proper level for each of the requirements in what we call authority documents, or the mandates, laws, rules, standards, etc. But what about the framework itself? It's a legal hierarchical framework. And that means you have something that's a higher level control being pretty broad, and the lower you get, it gets more and more specific. And if you take, for example, synchronize the clocks on your log server, that's a more specific control than establishing and maintaining log servers. But if a law says that you have to synchronize the clocks, it's implying that you're going to actually have log servers. You can't ignore it. So what about the examples that we were looking at before? if we take this high-level control, you can see that's in 27001 and a bunch of other requirements, right, FFIEC. But as you go lower and lower down, the child and the child and the child and the child and the child, you can see it gets more and more specific as you go. And there are lots of other laws, rules, mandates, standards that apply to each of these different levels. But together, they form a single hierarchy of controls, and you can look at the body of work together and understand how it all fits together. Just like when you clasp your hands together and your fingers interlace, you can integrate these different types of authority documents all the way down to a DSIS-DIG, all the way up to a cybersecurity framework. And a single set of harmonized controls which give you the details you need to understand in order to accomplish whatever tasks you need to do. And two really important points: keep up with the regulatory changes and have that common control audit so you can get audited once and attest multiple times. So the UCF is the only generally available common control framework. Right, so with the UCF, there are actually three key pieces. There's the database itself, the Unified Compliance Framework, there's UCF Mapper to get data in, and the Common Control Hub to get data out, and that's how we integrate to Onspring. So let's just quickly review what's in the database. We've got over 1,000 mapped authority documents with over 100,000 individual mandates and 10,000 common controls. So a lot of those are repeated, right? Have a strong password, train your end users, right? So the common control set is much smaller. And really important is our dictionary. We have over 250,000 interconnected words and phrases, and that's how we do mapping. Here are the domains we cover, quite a few domains, and we're adding new domains all the time. We started with information security, and the most recent one was EGRC when we added OSEG. And our structure, it's the first patented structure for GRC, and you can see how we integrate all these different elements of compliance, right? So an issuer could be NIST. The authority document says 853 or 171 or whatever, so it's one to many. Every authority document has multiple mandates. Well, not every, but most of them do, or citations, and then each citation is connected to a common control. But from a common control, you can be connected to multiple mandates, like strong passwords or something like that. And we'll get into some of these other pieces later. How do we get data in? That's through UCF Mapper, garbage in, garbage out. So we have to ensure that it's very high quality content going into the UCF. It's a great piece of academic research, but people rely on it, and we want to make sure that they get the best information available. So we really enforce some great processes through UCF Mapper. And the mapping process is we take the authority document, we pull out the mandates or the citations, we tag individual nouns and verbs using our compliance dictionary, mapping those terms to named entities like assets or roles or record examples, which really allows us to match the mandates to controls and make sure we have the correct audit questions in place. Because you can't observe a record example, right? You examine a record and so on. So let's just take a quick look at one example, and this is going to be from 800-171. Limit information system access to the types of transactions and functions authorized users are permitted to execute. So you can see the primary verb, limit, system access, primary noun. And as we went through the mapping process, UCF Mapper determined that established access rights based on least privilege, with the help of our mapping process, that is the correct one. And when you look at it, you say, okay, that makes sense, and our common control is very simply worded in phrases that people understand. Well, 315, just a little further down, uses different words to say the same thing. It's the same audit question to determine whether 312 is met and 315 is met. So establish access rights based on least privilege. So this is within a document, and obviously between documents we're doing the same thing. So a lot of this is powered by our compliance dictionary, and just to give you a sense of what that looks like, let's pop over to compliance dictionary, and in this case, we did a search for breach, and you can go today to compliancedictionary.com and do searches and see how words are connected and interconnected. And you can see breach is a noun or a verb, and it depends how it gets tagged, right? And there's a relationship between breach and other words and phrases, and this is part of the UCF Mapper technology. Right, so how do we get the data out? The data comes out through the Common Controls Hub, and if you have the Common Controls Hub basic subscription plus the API add-on, then you can bring the content into Onspring. So that's all it takes, the Common Controls Hub basic plus API, and then we get it into Onspring. So this, essentially, the Common Controls Hub is like a giant wizard that sits on top of the authority document table. And as you select a document, it uses the citation table as a filter and then just shows the common controls associated with whatever document you've chosen. And you can select more and more documents, and it'll still continue to go through that process, and it'll show you the least number of controls you need to meet the authority documents you've selected. So let's pop back over into my browser, and we're going to go live into my Common Controls Hub workspace. So on the left side is where I select my authority documents. On the right side, we'll see the controls get populated in this area once I select them. And so in this case, we're going to start with GDPR. That's a huge requirement coming up for a lot of folks in May. So if I select this, I can see there are 227 mandated controls. Those are direct controls, 78 implied, and 1,174 implementation. So what do these things mean? And I can actually hover and see exactly what it means. So if it's in bold, it's mandate, it's a direct requirement. There's a direct connection between that authority document and that control, right? If it's implied, it's in italics. Well, you can see there are a couple of these top-level domains that we call impact zones, and if I open up monitoring and measurement, for example, you can see report compliance monitoring statistics is in bold, and if I click Get Info, I can see exactly where this is in GDPR. Cool, right? So as a research tool, it's unparalleled. But now if I take this and I say, well, let's layer on some of the other documents I want. I want maybe SOC 2, right? Boom, updates the list. And maybe I want PCI 3.2. So I can search by typing, or I can look through by geography or by subject matter, and you can see we cover a lot of horizontals and verticals, you know, everything from banking and finance and healthcare and payment card horizontal, privacy, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just round this off with international standard 27001. And now that I've selected the documents that I want, and I can use this little selector here to show those are the 4 documents I want. I have 874 mandated controls. It covers these top-level domains. And if I want to go back into, you know, monitoring and measurement, you can see, oh, now there's new stuff here. Establish and maintain IT inventory. And I can again get info, and we'll see that, oh, this is part of PCI and part of 27001. That's why it's there. And if I open this up, establish, maintain an IT inventory, we'll see what it takes to create that IT inventory. If it's in plain text, it's implementation. That means it's not directly a mandate from any of these documents I've selected, but from all the documents ever mapped, it was a mandate. Something out there said you have to do that. And so when you look at it, you say, well, we don't have to conduct environmental surveys, but if we don't, do we really have an IT inventory? Do we know we have everything in it? What about software? Nothing specifically said software, but probably you need software, right, to have an IT inventory, and so on. So once I have this list completed, all I need to do is save it and name it. And if I say share this list, this now makes this list of authority documents and the citations and the controls and anything else that Onspring supports get directly available to Onspring. That's all I need to do from the Common Controls Hub. But there's a couple other things I want to show you just while we're here. It's a great research tool, as I mentioned. And so let's say we want to go to compare. And let's say we're using Onsprings, and we've got this Onspring UCF list, and we're following these controls. And we're doing all this stuff, and someone says, well, now we want to do something for the federal government, and that means we need to follow 800-171. So what is that going to take to add 800-171? I can select it, and it's going to instantly do a gap overlap analysis. And you'll see that 58 of the controls from 171 are already taken care of, right? And I can do research on those, and I can pop open and say, you know, operationalize key monitoring and logging, and here's where it is in list A and PCI, and here's where it's in list B. So I can see interactively whether I've done it. And by the way, you can use these little square rows or expanders to open this up at any point, and any of the columns do that. And I can see specifically, well, what's new. And some of these will be top-level domains or whatever, and those new things are things that you can then do research on to figure out what is it going to take to meet this requirement. Now, with a couple of clicks, I just saved myself about $11,000. at $60 per hour, 12 minutes per citation, that's 187 hours to analyze all this stuff. But with a couple of clicks, I've saved myself a lot of money. Now, you can see with these three numbers, right? When I did these Venn diagrams, that's what I use because it's so easy. I didn't actually spend all that time. That would have been a waste of time. So from here, let's pass the controls back to Onspring so you can see how they make the UCF actionable and come to life.
Excellent. Thanks, Craig. That's fantastic. The two things that you said that really stick out for me are, keeping up with the changes, and then just kind of this concept of the shared requirements, right? The ask once, answer many concept. And that is definitely something we subscribe to here as well. So I'm really excited to show our side of it now. So with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to hand the controls over to Matt Pugh. Again, Matt is our Vice President of Product. He and his team are the ones doing all of the really technical work and building this excellent platform that I get to use every day. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt. He's going to talk to you guys a little bit about our data connector technology and how we take all of that great information that Craig and the folks at Unified Compliance are producing through those mechanisms, through that mapper and the hub, and how do we get that into Onspring so it can actually be actioned. So Matt, take it away.
Great, thanks Jason, and thanks Craig as well. So just quickly before Jason kind of gives you an overview of the UCF content and action inside of the Onspring solutions, I want to spend a little bit of time just giving you an overview of the data connector strategy that we've developed, which in this case is kind of that magic conduit between UCF and Onspring. Now, with your data inside of Onspring, you can use all of our process automation tools, our dashboarding, our reporting, workflow mechanisms, all of the automation that we offer. But we also understand that with a tool like Onspring, it's important to be able to get data into Onspring as well as get data out of Onspring. And we want to make sure that there aren't any roadblocks to either of those sides. Right now, you can get data out of Onspring in a variety of ways using a number of our export tools, which are baked into dashboards and reports and individual content records. And we have a number of ways to get data into Onspring already as well in terms of, users can manually add content to the forms and the solutions. You can use bulk imports from Excel, CSV files. You can even email content directly into Onspring. Onspring can actually create content for you using our automation engine as well based on dynamic rules that can be generated. And then we've historically also had our very flexible and powerful API, which would allow you to connect to any external data source that also had an API component. Typically, the API has been the most customizable and most flexible way to get data in from any system, but as you probably know, it also requires the most technical expertise, oftentimes in terms of developer hours or managing that through your IT. And so what we've tried to do is we've developed a data connector strategy, which basically allows for end users or business users to have the power of the API in their hands using our drag and drop and our point click interface. So really for us, it's the next evolution in terms of an easy way for non-technical users to get data from a variety of sources, a variety of external applications, or even file data sources that live on maybe SFTP sites. All of that can be done now through a business user without involving your IT or your developers. So a data connector will really allow you to get multiple sources of data all at the same time and import those sources of data directly into multiple Onspring apps, again, all at the same time. And in doing that, we can preserve any reference or related material between those data sources and ensure that those connections still exist once the data exists inside of Onspring. And our data connector feature was developed, we're going to show you briefly here in a minute the UCF connector that we developed to get some of the data that Craig was just showing you. But we've built our data connector feature in a very generic way that allow us to easily extend it to other external systems, other SaaS-based products, other file-based resources very easily from our side. So the UI is very generic, very intuitive, very easy to use, and very extensible. So rather than just continue to sort of talk at you about our data connector strategy, we're more of a show and tell type company, so I'm just going to dive right in to our back office. And the administration area for Onspring is where a lot of the configuration behind the scenes are done. And for this particular demonstration, I'm just going to dive right into one of our UCF data connectors that we've already built and kind of show you how easy it is for those business users to map content from UCF directly into Onspring apps, hit the run button, and you're set. So we've broken this one down into basically 4 areas, just some general connection information, and then some app mapping between UCF and Onspring, individual field mapping, and some data rules. So I'm just going to start at the top real quick here. And obviously, you can enable or disable these kind of connectors as you need to. You can see for any connector based on history when it was last run. So if I want to, I can just quickly navigate in here and see that Jason ran this connector, and we've done some updates as well as some add news. And so in this particular situation, we added a bunch of citation records, which you can see here in a minute when Jason goes through his overview. And then what you were just seeing from the Common Controls Hub with Craig, when he was able to select his documents and then save and share that list, those shared lists are available directly inside of Onspring right here. And so if I need to, I can use this connect and refresh shared list selections. That'll take me off to a page, allows me to log directly in to the Common Controls Hub. And then when I do that, I can come back and I can ensure that I always have the most up-to-date shared list information. And if I've added any documents inside of one of these lists, when I do that, all of that content gets immediately refreshed. And the authentication status is you don't have to log in every time. It's just available there when you need it if you want to make sure that if you've created a new list and you want to pull that into Onspring. So that's as simple as that from a connection standpoint. After that, basically it just comes down to some app mapping and some field mapping, because we allow you to choose which components from UCF you want to put into your Onspring platform. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a lot of the same data sources that you just saw from Craig's presentation, with authority documents, citations, controls, assets, issuers. All of the sources that UCF has are offered and available to you within Onspring. On the right-hand side is a list of available apps that we have in our particular instance here. Now, we're in a bit of a large demo environment, so we have hundreds of actually applications that are available to you to solve complex business problems, and you can scan through that list. If I go down to the bottom here, you'll see that we've already pre-built a number of UCF applications inside of Onspring, and all of these applications are available to any of our clients. We can put these apps directly into your instance for you. If you're starting out with us, or if you've been with us for a while, we can add those right to your instance. And in doing that, a lot of the fields that exist in the UCF data sources are already pre-built for you. So in this particular one, I've already mapped document citations and controls. If I wanted to add another piece, if I wanted to roles in, it's as simple as just a drag and drop. If I want to add audit items in, again, it's just drag and drop. Or if I had those items in and I no longer want to keep them, I can just drag them right off the page, and this is the collection of data sources that this connector will run from each and every time. Once I've gone through the easy exercise of just mapping the high-level apps and the data that I want to get from the Common Controls Hub and the UCF framework, you'll notice that each of the items that I've mapped now have a corresponding field mapping section. So again, if I were to drop roles, if I were to drop roles down in the list,
doesn't like where you put it.
If I drop roles down in the list, it automatically adds that as an item that I can configure from a field mapping standpoint. So if I expand one of these mapped areas, again, you can see that because of how we've pre-built the applications or based on some name matching that you've done on your particular application, all of these are pre-populated for me. So I don't have to necessarily drag them all around. But if I want to, again, I can add content that's not already mapped, and I can take content away. So in terms of this interface allows me as the business user to say, this content is exactly what I want in my Onspring app for this particular data connector run. And then finally, I can go through that exercise for each of the apps that I've mapped above. And then the last step is just a couple of matching items for how do I want this content to be imported into Onspring. So do I want to just make sure that I'm adding new content every single time, or do I want to update only records that have matched to look at some of that comparison information that Craig has shown? Or maybe I want to do an update to content that matches, and anything that doesn't match, I want to go ahead and add that as brand new content. And in doing that, I can set some matching fields and then some additional fields on how I want to add in some of the related values. Do I want, if a citation now is related to more than one authority document or control, do I want to replace those, or do I want to append them? Small things like that. So we give you a little bit of data rules to make sure that the content is getting imported into the system exactly the way you want. And really, that's about it. I mean, honestly, what you saw Craig do from selecting the content in the Common Controls Hub, he was able to select meaningful content to him in just a few minutes. And in doing that and saving and sharing that list within the Common Controls Hub, and then shifting over to Onspring, you were able to see that really in just a few minutes, I can take that content that's been shared, I can map it directly to my Onspring system, I can hit Save Changes and Run, and we import thousands of records per minute. So even if you had a very large list on the Common Controls Hub, we're able to have a user configure this in a few minutes, save things from the Common Controls Hub in a few minutes, and import it in just a few minutes. And then again, you've got that content that's already in the Onspring system and ready to go. And I think with that, I'd like to transition back to Jason, because he can now show you that the power of the Onspring solutions once you have that magic conduit built and that data connector run and that content exists inside of your solution.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I personally am really, really excited and geeked about this data connector. I can think of, unfortunately for Matt, I can think of several use cases that will keep the team working on intently. So thank you, Matt, for walking us through that. It's fantastic. So to Matt's point, I'm going to get out to a starting place here. Now that we've, Craig's done all the hard work of building his list and determining what regulations he wants to focus on, and then Matt and the technical team have made it really easy for us to port that information into the system. We're kind of in a state now of now what? Okay, great. We've got all this regulatory information. Now what do we do with it? How do we make sense of this in Onspring? And the good news is that there are a lot of different ways and a lot of different angles at which we can come at this data. And I'm going to talk to you about a few of those today. Before I get started on the Onspring side, though, I want to reiterate, Onspring is a very flexible platform. So everything you're about to see today, you can bend it and shape it the way you want. Everything from the way the reports look and the way the dashboards lay out to how the specific formula logic rolls up a control status all the way through the authority document level to the messaging and the notifications that get sent out to individuals that alert them, hey, it's your turn in the process. We have a new regulation. We have a regulatory change that needs your attention. So what I'm going to show you today is really kind of call it a best practice suggestion, or just one way of maybe approaching this problem. But as I find myself saying with Onspring a lot, there are always multiple ways to approach the same problem. Okay, so kind of getting back to something that Craig alluded to, those two key points, right? Keeping up with the new regulations and the regulatory changes, and then getting into this concept of shared requirements and deploying those shared requirements. We're going to focus on that first point first in terms of the new regulations, the regulatory changes. So let's kind of take our story into Onspring. Craig's run his list, Matt has run his data connector, and we've brought all this information into Onspring. So the very first thing we might be asking ourselves is, are there any new regulations out there that require our attention? Have we brought a regulation or some regulatory data into the system that we need to focus on, or we need to determine what it means to us as an organization? Well, it just so happens that I have a report here on the dashboard just called Authority Documents to be Reviewed. So you'll notice I've got this report filtered, so I'm looking at items with an internal review status of either not reviewed or review in process. What this is telling me is that these are new authority documents. These are items that we haven't touched yet. We haven't evaluated their impact on our organization yet. So what I can do if I want a little bit more room to maneuver, I can just as easily expand this report, so I've got a little bit of full screen to work with here. And now I can see that there's a few new authority documents in here. So I have a couple of options at my disposal. Let's say, for example, I'm looking at the payment card industry, the PCI 3.2. I have the ability to, number one, click on that and jump right into the record, right? Let's go take a look and see what are some of the data points around the record. What's the licensing info? What citations exist, right? And if I want to start navigating into these individual citations or even down into the linked controls, I'm going to have the ability to do that. And certainly another thing you can control are the naming conventions of these link fields. So if I want to have the title of the control here, very simple to do that. I have it as the number because that's what's going to facilitate that relationship when I bring the data back in. So I can see that this is a new regulation, and if I want, right here from the report, I can start to perform my internal review, and that's as simple as clicking on this little quick edit pencil. Now I can see a description of that document. I can read through it, and if I want, I can indicate that my review is in process, or I can indicate that, yes, I've reviewed PCI 3.2, and once I've done that, Onspring dynamically says, okay, well, you've reviewed it. Now we need you to tell us what is the criticality of this authority document. What this might be used to inform your downstream control owners are what is the overall criticality of the control that you've put into place or that you're responsible for executing. If you want to let your control owners know that, hey, you're dealing with a mission critical control because this helps us satisfy a mission critical regulation, to me, that's a very empowering thing for your staff and for your control owners to really understand how they fit into the process. So you'll see that as we get through the demonstration. And then once I'm done with this guy, I can click Save and Next, and up pops the next item, ISO 27001. Again, when I review it, I can indicate that this one is a high criticality, and I hit Save. And now, you'll notice that those two items have dropped off of this report. That's because this report is filtered. It's all about presenting the information to the end user that they need to take action on or that they need to focus on. So now, instead of having 7 authority documents to be reviewed, I've knocked those other 2 off, and I now have 5 authority documents left to be reviewed. And that has caused some of a ripple effect down in my internal controls, right? How many controls are actually deemed mission critical or high or low in criticality based on their relationship to the authority documents or based on what that authority document means to us as an organization. Now, the second kind of side of that coin, if you will, would be regulatory changes. So this report, and I'll go ahead and expand that again, this report's going to assume that I already have some of these regulations in the system, but there's been changes, right? Something has changed about a particular regulation. So, for example, if I want to look at, ISO 27002, I can see that these records are actually regulatory change reviews. This is a way that my organization can identify the items that have changed since we last reviewed them, automatically create a regulatory change review record and alert the responsible individuals, and then have the ability to document that review. Basically evidence that somebody has gone in and said, yes, I have made an assessment of those changes. Now, if I want to see what's changed in a particular record, there's a couple of different ways I can do this, but here's a really easy way to do it. Let's, again, just say I'm focusing on this ISO IEC 27002. And you can see there's a hyperlink there. I can click on that link, and it's going to take me right back into the authority document record. One capability that's built in throughout the Onspring platform is the ability to review version history. So what version history allows you to do is to take the current version of a record and compare it as of a point in time to an older version of the record. So if I wanted to see what did this document or this record look like compared to this record back in July of 2016, for example, I could click on that little compare button, And now, Onspring is going to be very clear about presenting on the face of the document, here's what's changed. The green text is going to show me what's new. The red strike through is going to show me what's been removed. So that's just a quick and easy way to look right there on the screen to say, what has actually changed? What is the ripple effect of this change? And this change review can really be set up or performed at any level of the UCF content. If you want to perform it at the authority document level, if you want to bring it down to that individual control level, let's say a control has changed, this regulatory review process can be embedded at any point in the process. Just for simplicity's sake, we've embedded it here at the authority document level. So again, now that I've reviewed and said, yep, there's really no ripple effect or there's no change here, I can use my quick edit to pop that open. I can see the authority document there that's the subject of the change. I can document any review notes, no changes of note, or I can say I've communicated the results of this change to the individuals impacted, or I could even set up Onspring so that if there is a change or I note that someone needs to be notified, I can have a notification, I can have formulas that flow all the way downstream to those individual control owners and basically send them alerts to say these are the changes in ISO that you need to be aware of. Now when I mark that reviewed, Matt alluded to some of our process automation capabilities. Just very simplistically, now that I've reviewed that, I can capture the date that I've performed that review, and I can even have the system capture who was the individual who actually signed off on that. And I can make these fields privatized so that I can't then manipulate this and say, oh, well, I'm going to put this on Matt to say he was the one who reviewed it. Even if I did that, Onspring would maintain the record of who actually made the save, and we'd always have that audit trail. And again, when I save that guy, now that ISO standard has dropped off of my regulatory changes awaiting review because I've completed that review. So again, this visual indicator, this workflow indicator to let me know, hey, Jason, these are items that require your attention. The fact that they're on this report means you need to do something about them. That's one of the powers of having this sort of dashboard in this presentation. So now that we've reviewed it and we've brought the information in, and to Craig's point, we've mapped all of these controls, this whole concept of ask once, answer many. Now it's a matter of saying, okay, well, how do we deploy those controls in our organization? How do we get the individual control owners to buy into the fact that the control they're performing now actually impacts our overall compliance rating at the authority document level? So I just switched over to another dashboard, and you can always kind of see where we are, get your bearings here. We're on the UCF controls dashboard. And it's just another way to present the information, another series of reports. And that's the nice thing about the dashboards is it allows you to present information to end users based on who they are and what actions they need to take in the system. Really make it easy for people to understand what's on your plate, what is your responsibility. So I can see my authority documents, when I was reviewing those incoming authority documents, I deemed them to be mission critical or high or medium. And if I was interested, I might say, well, what are those 3 authority documents that are mission critical? Right there from the dashboard, I can apply that filter, and I can see it's PCI 3.2, 3.1, and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. If I'm interested in those that are high, I just click on that bar right there, and I can filter down my list. So I can do some basic research. What's important to us as an organization? I can see which authority documents are currently undergoing regulatory reviews or have already had a review completed, or those new authority documents maybe that have not undergone any regulatory changes, so being able to monitor that. Now here's a report that I really like, and I'm going to expand this one so we can work with it a little bit. This is going to be very representative of the tie-in between these high-level authority documents, the individual citations and UCF controls that Craig and his team are producing, and the individual actions and responsibilities that your folks out in the wild have as they manage their control environment. So what I'm looking at here is basically a report at the authority document level that tells me, hey, these are the authority documents that have nothing but effective controls associated with them. Right? I can see PCI 3.2, I can see my, my GDPR regulation. We're all looking good with this effective or perform, but these are the ones I might be more concerned about, right? I might have a regulation that has a control or controls that we're just not meeting our standards, or they're ineffective or not performed. Or I can see that there are others where the evaluation is in process and obviously where mitigation is in process. But if I want to see the full list again, I just clear that filter out. So to get an idea of what's happening here, right, let's look at this guy, the one where mitigation is in process. I'm interested in knowing what specific control has mitigation in process. So now what I have the ability to do is start to expand and start to walk down the path of saying, okay, well, what are the individual citations? What are the individual controls? And then what are the controls that have been assigned out to our individuals who are actually performing them? And right there, I can see that for 1.1.1, I can see the status of that citation is mitigation in process. If I expand further, I can see the single control that's been related to that. And all the way down at the lowest level, I can see the specific company control that's been put into place. Chris Pantanius is the owner of this particular control. I can see that mitigation is in process. Now, as I'm doing this research or as I'm diving down in here, I can open this guy up. And now I can start to get into the detailed control, the control that's actually been deployed, that Chris has been assigned responsibility for, that he's testing, that he's logging findings against, that he's validating over time. So I can start to scroll through and I can see what were the last test results that we performed. Has it been tested in, within the last 6 months or within an appropriate amount of time? When's the next time we would ideally test these controls? And all of these data points can be used to automatically launch new tests, design tests, operating tests. However your testing program works, we can use our automation engine to build a lot of that logic in, and what I like to say is set the table for your control owners or for your process owners to actually do the work and have the work put out there for them. Now, as I scroll down a little bit further, I can see that there is a finding out there, and that finding has actually been approved, and it's awaiting some level of mitigation. So I have an open finding associated with this control, which ultimately drives my overall compliance rating of mitigation in process. Now, if you think about it, this is one single control that one single individual in my organization is responsible for. But how did we even get to this control? We got to that control by navigating to a report that tells me at the overarching authority document level, this is the overall status of your controls. And now I can see that for PCI 3.1, I have mitigation in process, and it's very easy for me to drill down through that series of internal controls, of citations, et cetera, and see exactly which control is causing the problem. To take it a step further, right, if I start to go down, another path here, and let me see if I can find one here where that has, and actually, let's do this. I'm going to go to content, and I'm going to just look up a UCF control. Let's say there's a particular UCF control that I'm aware of. Let's just pick 7030 here. Edit the audit assertion for accuracy. And let's just say I have a new process or a new auditor in place. And there are a variety of different ways we can do this as well. But this is the data that actually got piped in through the data connector, the process that Matt showed you to bring in Craig's list. So here's an individual control. I can see what citation or citations it relates to. I can see whether or not it's a parent control, and I can see whether or not it's related to any company controls. Now, in this situation, it's not related to any company controls. But I have this neat little feature called control deployment request. So if I want to, I might say, well, I've got Sarah in my organization, and she's a new auditor or she's a new control owner. I want to give her this control in the context of her organization. So I can go ahead and do a quick add or a create new record, but I'll do a quick add just to show you how efficiently folks can get data into the system. So when I click on that quick add, you can see a couple of these references are already populated. It populated me as the control owner simply because I have that field set to the default user, but I want Sarah to be the control owner here. And I'm just going to flag it. I can flag it with any of these flags. These flags are fully editable. This is just another reporting element that you can use, but certainly the critical tie-in here is up to the authority documents. And I can indicate, other kind of attributes about that control. How frequently is it performed? What's the automation? What's the placement? Anything else that actually helps me, kind of dictate, hey, what are the attributes of this control that I need to worry about? I went ahead and selected the North America organization, but frankly speaking, if Sarah is in the North America organization, we can just as easily auto-populate that data. But once I hit save, and I've gone ahead and submitted that request. I'm going to go ahead and save this record. And now what you'll notice is a brand new control has been populated. And it's edit the audit assertion for accuracy. It's copied that data directly down in an underlying control. And you can even see that my UCF control status has gone from a status of no related controls to evaluation in process. So very simply, quickly, and easily, I've actually deployed that new control. I've made Sarah the owner, and now I can send Sarah a notification. For example, if I want her to get an email of a new control or a new regulatory request that requires her attention, it's very simple to set up email messaging to engage those users. Let them know when something has been added to the system that actually impacts them. Now Sarah can get in and start down the road of testing her internal control, and then just like I showed you, through that testing process, through those evaluations, through the documentation of any findings or any issues, we can have formulas that basically have a ripple effect from evaluation and process at the control status up through the citation status, right? So now I can even see evaluation and process at the citation status, and then if I go all the way up to SOC 2, and I look at my company control status, it's here somewhere. Basically, I may not have it on the layout, but ultimately now I'm going to have another, let's go back to my dashboard so we can see that report. I'm going to have another authority document where the evaluation is in process, right? So now if I filter that guy down, there's SOC 2. It all of a sudden showed up on that list simply because I assigned out one of its controls for evaluation at a very low level. So the nice thing here is that because we're flowing this compliance status or this company control status at every level of this relationship, at the authority document level, at the citation level, at the individual control level, not only does that allow us to get this macro level view of where are things kind of going right and going wrong in our overall regulatory process, but now we can start to pinpoint the areas of concern. We can pinpoint the individual citations that are presenting us with problems because their controls are not being performed. And we can pinpoint the individual UCF controls and the underlying company controls that are putting us at risk of missing out on hitting the mark on multiple regulations. Getting back to that ask once and answer many, just by those folks, those control owners, those testers, being out there, getting their assignments, and you know, we give them a space to go as well. If I'm a control owner, I may want to monitor my individual controls, my open validations, my open tests. But now I've given them a real tie-in to show, here's how your process and your control testing actually influences everything that's happening at a very macro level, at a very strategic level in the organization. Again, that is a very empowering thing for the folks in your organization to understand and to know, hey, what I'm doing actually means something. It's meaningful. And then to kind of tie it all together, the last dashboard I'll show you guys is just a general generic issue monitoring dashboard. The reason I bring this up, though, is, you know, as much as we'd like to think that everything's always going to go perfect within our regulatory compliance process, it's going to happen where you're going to identify gaps or issues or concerns that bubble up through the normal course of control testing. So understand that we certainly have a full suite of finding and issue management capabilities, everything from defining the findings, making those critical relationships to the controls so we understand the impact of those findings, documenting and assigning out mitigation plans so that folks in the organization are accountable for their actions. They're allowed to provide updates, request due date extensions, but I know that from a reporting and a senior management and board level reporting standpoint, this seems to be the primary focus. What issues do we have out there, and what impact does that have on our organization? So we certainly offer all of those capabilities as well. Okay, so with that, that really concludes the portion that we were planning on presenting. I know that Sarah has been monitoring the work queue or the question queue, so we've left a little bit of time here. So Sarah, if you have any questions that need answering, now would be a great time.
Sure, thanks to everyone who submitted some questions through the Q&A panel. We do have a couple of questions, and the first one, Craig, is going to come to you. This is a question about the Common Control Framework and how you address the issue of conflicting controls and requirements between regulations and standards. Can you shed some light on that for us, Craig?
We do, actually. There's a, hopefully you can hear me, there's a hierarchy of authority documents, and it starts at the highest level, the things that can actually get you put in jail, right, from the from the authorities themselves. And it goes all the way down to the lowest level is manufacturer guidelines. So in between, there might be contractual obligations like PCI and so on, but we don't allow controls in the system that conflict with laws. And if there's something that's actually conflicting, like hold this information for 6 months and hold it no longer than 3 months, we might put both of those in so that you can then see which authority you have to respond to.
All right. Thank you, Craig. The next question is regarding the Onspring interface itself. So, Jason, I'm going to kick this one over to you. How do you determine the reviewers of regulatory changes? Are those control owners, process owners? How is that assigned?
It's a really good question. So, the easy answer is it's really up to you guys to determine that, right? So if I go back into an authority document, for example, you might want to assign individual responsibility within your organization for a particular authority document. You may not see it here on the form, but there may be an individual who's responsible, for example, for maintaining and monitoring the Cloud Security Alliance. So when I talked about the concept of these regulatory change reviews automatically launching, when we configure that rule and we configure that action in Onspring, if you have someone named at the the regulation level, that individual's name can automatically be pulled into the newly created regulatory change review. On the flip side, though, there are other options you have. If you have a team of individuals or a group of individuals who are responsible for monitoring and performing regulatory change reviews, you can use our workflow engine to configure rules that say everyone in this group must approve the change, or an individual from this group must approve the change, or first to the party wins, or what have you. So we can be very dynamic with how those assignments are made. But depending on how it works in your organization, we've got a couple of different ways to kind of come at that issue and make sure that, to really answer the question, to make sure that the right individuals are being notified when something is their responsibility.
And kind of along that same line, Jason, is there an approval status to be assigned to reviews of regulatory items?
Yeah, absolutely. If I go back to, and I kept it pretty simplistic here, so if we look at our regulatory changes awaiting review, right? We've just got a simplistic review status. It's open or it's closed, right? It's open, under review, or complete. But we work with many organizations in a lot of these different GRC areas like control testing, internal audit testing, risk management, where you want to have a multi-stage workflow. You want to have more than one individual kind of perform that quality check and make sure, yes, I agree with your results, the reasonable person test, as it were. So it's very easy to use Onspring's configuration platform and our workflow engine to define what are the different stages of that review process and who's responsible at each individual stage.
Okay. Thank you. And we do have another question here. How many compliance subject matter experts might be required to effectively utilize and manage the output of Onspring?
Wow, that's a very good question. I would say that it's going to probably vary on the nature and the complexity of the regulatory environment that you're dealing with, right? I know that, for example, financial institutions are very heavily regulated, and there's a myriad of different types of regulations. So I know in those organizations, you're going to have experts and expertise in different pockets, right? If it's capital requirements versus liquidity requirements versus, just plain old banking regulations. You might have to have as many experts as those regulations or your regulatory landscape kind of require. But certainly there's also this technology or information security and technology component. So even at a very broad level, you got to feel like from a business operation and like a vertical or an industry perspective, you're probably going to need some level of regulatory expertise that's involved in Onspring and at least routing things the right way, as well as on that technology side from an information security standpoint, because that's obviously a very specialized area of focus.
Okay, thank you. Craig, I've got another question for you. What if someone is looking for a document that isn't in the Common Control tab?
Oh, that's a great question. That's one of the reasons we created UCF Mapper. So UCF Mapper is the technology we use internally to map documents to the UCF, but UCF Mapper has just been released externally, and there's a training program through ISC Squared and some other parameters on it. But if you go to ucfmapper.com, you can actually see what it takes to become a mapper, and any organization now can map authority documents into the UCF. And you can actually map your own internal control standards to the UCF as well, and that allows you to connect them directly up to the authority documents you want to follow. And everything you map in through UCF Mapper will be available through the Common Controls Hub and therefore into Onspring.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, that was the last question that came in. So we've hit the top of the hour. I want to really thank everyone who took the time to participate today. Again, we'll be sending out a recording of this session, but we really hope you enjoyed the presentation. We hope it was educational for you. And the last thing we will leave you with is our nice faces. So you didn't have to think about our faces while we were talking, but here they are. I'll leave this up here for a minute or two in case you want to take down any of our contact information. But any of us on the call are more than happy to field and answer any questions you might have. So thank you so much for joining, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks for hosting this, Onspring. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig.